I've never played a Sonic game before. I've certainly heard a lot about the Blue Hedgehog who was at one time a competitor to Mario, but I've never actually played any of his games for myself. I know that Sonic's jump to 3D was controversial at best, and a lot of the newer games were very poorly received. Outside of the major characters like Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Eggman, I know absolutely nothing about the story of these games, and all my impressions about the personality of the characters comes from that Sonic fandom.
I've come to make an announcement.
I'm hoping that my lack of knowledge will give me a unique perspective on Sonic Mania, a game designed to appeal to longtime fans of the Sonic series. This will probably make the review a little different than the ones I've done in the past. It's a review of Sonic Mania, but it's also a way for me to share my experience with the classic Sonic gameplay formula and give my thoughts on it from a different perspective. Sonic Mania is unapologetically targeted at longtime fans of the series, and the positive reception I've seen from those fans makes it a clear success. But I wanted to find out if it would be a good introduction to the Sonic franchise for someone like me. So here's my review on Sonic Mania, from the perspective of someone who has never played a Sonic game before. Let's start things off with what will hopefully be the least controversial thing I say during this review. Sonic Mania has great sound design and an incredible soundtrack. Every time Sonic spin dashes or bounces on a jump pad or even lands on some spikes, there's a really satisfying sound effect to go with it. And the music is just incredible. Each zone's music is very unique. It has this energy that really drives you forward and makes you feel untouchable. And in the moments where the gameplay supports that feeling and has you shooting through the level at ludicrous speeds, Sonic is unlike any other platformer I've experienced. If I had to nitpick, I wish there was a bit more variety with the boss themes, but the ones in the game are good enough that I can't say it hurt my experience. The visuals are also excellent, with one small exception that I'll talk about later. The characters have so much personality without any dialogue. The way Dr. Eggman throws a temper tantrum when you destroy his machine, or the way Tails struggles to lift Sonic while flying, or the way Sonic gets impatient if you stop moving for a little while, all go a long way towards giving the characters a lot of charm. All the backgrounds look great, and some of them are incredibly detailed. I love everything about the visual design of Studiopolis, and the background of Titanic Monarch really makes it feel atmospheric and climactic, with this great futuristic cityscape in Act 1, and then the beautiful inside of the Titan with Act 2. Act 2 of Stardust Speedway has this awesome instrument theme, and all of Mirage Saloon nails a fun western look. And there are so many more examples of great visual design. The exception I mentioned has to do with the look of some of the bosses, but I'll be covering everything boss related later, so that's about it for visuals. The first time I opened Sonic Mania and started playing in Green Hill Zone, I will fully admit that I was not very good at the game. Sonic Mania is fairly unique among platformers I've played, and it was difficult for me to adjust at first. It's all about building up speed and momentum, and it's committed to the idea to the point where if you don't have any momentum, it's difficult for Sonic to even go up a small incline. Precision jumps that would be easy in a platformer with tighter controls can be a little difficult to do perfectly, because it's hard to get Sonic to come to a complete stop when you're going pretty fast. You rarely see precise jumps, so it isn't a huge deal, and once I got more used to Sonic's movements, I rarely had a problem. I'm completely aware that none of this is by accident, and it isn't poor game design. Saying that a game has tight controls is usually perceived as a good thing, and when the controls are unwieldy or hard to use, it's considered a bad thing, especially when talking about platformers. But for Sonic, the way the character moves is a core part of what makes it unique, and what makes it fun to play. The appeal of Sonic Mania doesn't come from precise platforming and making perfect jumps. It comes from gaining so much speed that you fly through a level incredibly fast while avoiding enemies and obstacles that make you lose not only your rings but all of your momentum. And when you look at it that way, the way Sonic moves makes perfect sense. A lot of the problems I had with the game appeared when I felt like the game was straying away from the core ideas that make it appealing, which led to some moments of frustration. There were a couple major sources of frustration for me in my first playthrough, and before I say what they were, I want to say this. This is just what I experienced. You don't have to agree with me, and I know that some of these problems come from a lack of skill or knowledge. It doesn't change the way I feel about them. The greatest source of frustration came from a combination of things that caused me to die at points where I felt it was undeserved. Those deaths, combined with Sonic Mania's extra life system, where running out of lives gets rid of all checkpoints in the zone and puts you back at the beginning of Act 1, forced me to repeat some zones multiple times. If Act 2 had a very tough boss fight and I died a couple of times, I would have to redo the entire zone to get back to it, just to die again and have to repeat the process. On my first playthrough, I died a lot, and most of my particularly annoying deaths happened because of how easy it is to get crushed or to drown. In Sonic Mania, when you get hit by an enemy or land on some spikes or anything causes you to take damage, you lose all of your rings with the chance to reclaim as many as you can within a couple seconds before they disappear. If you take damage with 0 rings, you lose a life and you have to go back to the last checkpoint you unlocked, lose all your lives, and you get sent back to the beginning of the zone. But there's also times where you die regardless of how many rings you have, which occurs whenever you get crushed or drown. The system isn't vastly different from other platformers. Mario has power-ups that allow you to survive getting hit by an enemy, but if you fall in a pit, you still die regardless. So at first I wasn't sure why Sonic Mania specifically bothered me. After thinking about it, I think one of the big reasons I got frustrated is because of how forgiving the ring system actually is most of the time. I rarely died unless it was from getting crushed or in a boss battle, because it's usually not difficult to hold on to at least one ring to keep yourself alive. And when there's one level of challenge for most of the game, but then all of a sudden I've instantly died from getting crushed, or I accidentally miss one jump underwater and now I don't have enough time to get air because of how slowly you move, it seems like the game is being unfair, although in reality it isn't much worse than what's found in other games. You're harshly punished for some mistakes while barely being punished for others. In those moments, I feel like Sonic Mania isn't playing to its strengths, because once I know that I can get crushed or that it's really easy to drown in a section, my first thought is to slow down and act very carefully to try and avoid getting crushed, or to make sure that I don't miss my jump while underwater. Instead of trying to gain speed as much as possible to fly through the level, everything becomes slowed down. I also want to quickly mention that there were a couple of moments where I got crushed without realizing that what I was standing on would crush me. The memory that stands out the most was in the chemical plant zone, where I got crushed by standing in between some moving boxes. It looked like Sonic could fit to me, but then I just instantly died. Although rare, it feels absolutely terrible to lose a precious life from something you didn't even realize would kill you. Now, the obvious solution to the crushing problem would be to just make getting crushed the same as landing on some spikes, where you lose all your rings and then are invincible for a couple seconds. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't consider it frustrating at all, and see it as just another aspect to master. So I'm not really sure what the best solution is. Next, I want to get a bit more specific about the game, by talking about the boss battles. This may be the most controversial thing I say in this review, but I think most of the boss fights in Sonic Mania kind of suck. You fight a boss at the end of each act, meaning there's 24 boss battles, plus one secret boss, and I really think that maybe 1/3 at most could be considered well-designed and unique. The remaining bosses can be put into two loose categories. The bosses that are extremely easy as long as you hold on to at least one ring every time you get hit, or the bosses that were extremely frustrating because they have ways to kill you instantly or make it very difficult to maintain that one ring. Almost all of the Act 1 bosses fall into that first category, with the exception of Studiopolis, Metallic Madness, and maybe Lava Reef Zone. The Act 1 Metallic Madness boss fight can sometimes be annoying because it's easy to get crushed on accident. So if you're not careful, you can lose a very precious life, but overall I think it's fairly unique for an Act 1 boss, and I wish more were like it. Almost all of the good bosses come in the second acts, and there's a couple that fall into the first category. But there's also a few that were extremely frustrating on my first playthrough, either because it wasn't clear to me how to beat them, or because they can instantly kill you or keep you from collecting rings. Act 2 of Stardust Speedway, Hydro City, and Oil Ocean were the absolute worst for me. The Metal Sonic boss from Stardust Speedway is a great boss visually, and I think the first two phases are solid, but I'm not a huge fan of the final phase. When Metal Sonic gets really big and starts chasing you, you have to hit the gem thing in his chest. But whenever you do, if Sonic bounces left instead of right, there's a very good chance he'll just fall off the edge and die. It happened to me a lot on my initial playthrough, and it was the first boss that I really struggled on. It felt random whether I would live or die, and I'm not confident enough to say that it was, because I can do it pretty consistently now, but every once in a while I still bounce off the wrong way and lose a life. All the times I've replayed the game, I've dreaded getting to the Oil Ocean boss especially. This octopus shouldn't be that hard, especially because unlike the other bosses I mentioned, you can kill this one pretty fast by just attacking the head a bunch. The main problems I kept encountering during the boss battle were, first, if you get hit by an attack, getting your rings back is really hard because they can just fall into the ocean. Second, part of the boss fight forces you to fall into the ocean, where you have to jump constantly to avoid sinking. If you stop jumping, it kills you very quickly, but the fact that you're constantly jumping can also make it harder to control, and easy to either get stuck under a platform or get hit by the projectiles it fires. The boss fight takes a very long time if you destroy the two tentacles that fire projectiles, but if you don't destroy them, you're almost guaranteed to get hit while attacking the head. You could argue that this gives the fight depth, but in my experience, it just makes it more frustrating. I've spent a lot of time trashing these bosses, so it's only fair that I should point out some of the bosses that I thought were well designed and interesting. Chemical Plant Act 2's boss has you play Puyo Puyo against Eggman. I had no idea what this game is called, and I had to look it up, but it's like one of those phone games that your mom probably played a couple years ago. It's not very difficult, but it is unique compared to all the other bosses. I appreciate how you just do it once and then it never comes back. The boss for Studiopolis Act 2 is not difficult at all, but I think all the different interesting mechanics make it memorable. It's a shame that I rarely see more than one because the boss dies so quickly. Press Garden Act 2 is a boss where you have to stun it by attacking when it's in midair in order to damage it, and whenever it jumps, it drops bombs that explode after a certain amount of time. This boss has fairly unique mechanics that make it the perfect level of challenge for me, and I like how you can't just hit it anywhere like a lot of bosses. You have to get under it to stun it first. Mirage Saloon Act 2 is a boss that I really liked almost purely because it's the only boss in the game that isn't a robot or Eggman in a machine. Kind of. It is a robot, but it turns into other characters that you have to hit in order to bring the robot out and do damage to it. The characters aren't difficult, but there are 3 of them, so it does add some variety. I'm guessing these guys are from another Sonic game, so maybe it'll be nostalgic for some people. I also like the final boss fight. Mostly. It has a great atmosphere with good music, and the visuals as well as the gameplay make it a fitting final boss. You alternate between fighting Eggman and getting teleported to fight various other robots. I think the fight takes a little bit too long to beat, considering that you do the exact same thing every time you're with Eggman. It's also incredibly easy to cheese by just standing in the corner and moving out a little bit when the missiles come down. I wish they had made the parts with Eggman a little bit more involved and in return made him take less hits to be defeated, but I enjoy the short challenges from all the robots you get teleported to. The last thing I want to mention about the bosses is that I found the visual design of them to be a bit repetitive. I have a feeling this is mostly because the game is leaning so heavily on classic Sonic, but having every fight be against Eggman or one of his robots got old pretty fast. I was so excited when the robot from Mirage Saloon turned into other characters, because I just wanted to see something different. If they're going to have all the boss fights be against robots in Sonic Mania 2 or whatever they do next, I hope they at least do something more like Mirage Saloon to make them unique. So I feel like I've exhaustively covered the boss fights of the game, but I haven't really talked much in depth about the zones themselves and the experience of playing them, because that's what the majority of the game is. One of the things I appreciate most about all the zones is how gigantic they are. There are so many different ways to get to the end of the level, and it makes replaying them much more interesting. I know that I still haven't gone through all the paths of all the levels after my 5 playthroughs, and it's always great to discover a new route that I haven't gone through before. Exploring gets you power-ups, extra lives, and sometimes a chance to play a minigame where you try and catch a robot to get a Chaos Emerald. The great thing about this is that every time you find one of these rings, you pick up where you left off. So if you miss all the rings in one level, it doesn't mean you can't collect all of the Chaos Emeralds. And there's way more rings than emeralds, so if you find a lot of them, you'll have plenty of chances to get all of them. The minigame itself is pretty fun. You have to pick up orbs to go faster, but you need rings to extend your time limit. I had a really tough time with this at first, but I figured out a trick that honestly made all of them much easier. If you just go up to the second level of speed, and then avoid all orbs and only go for rings, you'll still be fast enough to catch up to the robot without losing tons of control. If you get all the Chaos Emeralds, you unlock the ability to turn into Super Sonic when you have more than 50 rings. Personally, I didn't use it very often because it uses up all of your rings and I wanted to keep as many as possible. At the end of the game, you also get a new final boss. I don't really have much to say about it, so I didn't talk about it with the other bosses. Visually, it looks great, and it was actually extremely challenging for me. If you get hit too many times or stop collecting rings, it's very easy to run out and die. It honestly felt a bit unfair at times, but I still enjoyed it. Now, I want to talk about the individual zones in more detail. I've taken the liberty of making this tier list for each zone based purely on facts and logic. If you disagree with my rankings, I'm sorry to say that you're factually incorrect. It would take kind of a while for me to talk about every zone individually, so I'm just going to pick out a few that I think are worth mentioning, starting from the bottom of the list. Oil Ocean is probably my least favorite zone in the game, which coincidentally matches up with my least favorite boss in the game, that octopus I talked about earlier. It's not horrible, but I think it lacks a lot of original ideas compared to some of the others. The most memorable mechanics introduced here for me were this green plate thing that pops up every so often, as well as the timed nature of Act 2, where you frequently have to pull down levers to clear the air and keep Sonic from losing all his rings. I found myself getting bored on this stage more than any other, and I wish it was more unique. It also didn't help that the visual style is a bit bland for me. I thought Chemical Plant Zone did the industrial aesthetic better, and this one was retreading a bit. Green Hill Zone mostly got a pass from me because it's the first area in the game, and it introduces a lot of basic mechanics that appear in all the other stages like the jump pads. It's a solid level for introducing the game, even if it isn't absolutely mind-blowing. Titanic Monarch is a zone that has grown on me a lot over time. It's definitely the hardest zone in the game, mostly because of how long it is, and in a first playthrough where you don't know where to go, it's very easy to get a time over in Act 1 especially. It happened to me my first time through, and after getting a game over in Act 2 and having to redo the entire zone, I wasn't a huge fan of it. But I started to appreciate all the cool ideas on the level on my later playthroughs. Something similar to the walls that you can bounce off of are sort of present in other zones, although they look very different, but they're used so effectively in Titanic Monarch. The purple ball thing that launches you depending on how well you time your jump is a lot of fun to use and can lead to some really interesting challenges in Act 2. Overall, it's a great zone to end the game on, and I really enjoyed it. The visuals of Studiopolis are absolutely incredible, and I love everything about the way the mechanics match the aesthetic of the background. From the clapperboard that lets Sonic spring into the air, to the film roll that Sonic runs on, to the popcorn machine that shoots Sonic up to a higher level, it all matches perfectly. And the mechanics themselves are all really interesting and unique, considering it's only the third zone of the game. It's definitely one of my favorite zones in Sonic Mania, and I always have fun when I get to it. Finally, I have to talk about my favorite zone in Sonic Mania, Metallic Madness. Metallic Madness nails the basics with cool visuals and absolutely amazing music. I mean, just listen to this. But it also has a huge amount of new interesting mechanics, and even uses some basic ones in a unique way. In Act 1, there's platforms that flip in cycles, so you have to time your jumps. There's tall, spinning blades where only the bottom or top half does damage to you at a time, so you have to decide whether to wait until the bottom half is turned off, or try and time a jump to get over them when the top half is turned off. It also has an interesting section where it uses jump pads as obstacles instead of a way to get further in the level. You have to avoid hitting the jump pads or you'll get sent backwards. It's a great way to reuse the mechanic that's in every zone in a new and interesting way. One of my favorite things about this level is how it has mechanics that play with space. Act 1 and 2 both have ways to change the plane that Sonic is in. In Act 1, it's this launcher that sends him into the background, and in Act 2, he can stand on a machine that puts him behind shutters. Both of these mechanics don't push the idea super far, but they're still very interesting, especially in Act 2 when it can sometimes be hard to tell if an enemy or an obstacle is in the same plane as Sonic, and you have to be careful and figure out the correct path forward. Act 2 also has a shrink ray that makes Sonic tiny, which allows him to squeeze through some obstacles that he normally wouldn't be able to get through. Once again, this mechanic isn't really pushed very far, and I think there's a lot more interesting stuff they could have done with it, but it still is a lot of fun for one zone. Metallic Madness is full of great ideas that fit Sonic perfectly, and it's just the right amount of challenge considering it's the second to last zone of the game. The last thing I want to talk about is what Sonic Mania is like on repeat playthroughs. The inherent appeal of replaying the game is that the player is now better and can get through areas faster, die less, and keep more rings by the end. If scores are something that you care about, you can try and get as high of a score as possible, or do time trials to try and complete each zone as fast as possible. Personally, I'm not really driven by scores, but I do enjoy the feeling that I'm getting better at the game. The idea of maintaining momentum and going as fast as possible naturally makes me want to get better so I can maintain that speed for as long as possible. The game's design itself makes it great for replaying, but there's also some specific things that they've done that makes extra playthroughs worthwhile. Two that I've already mentioned are the branching paths of all the levels, allowing you to get to the end in many different ways, as well as the hidden rings that allow you to play a minigame. But there's also multiple characters. You can play as Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles. I completed the game once as Tails, and I played the first couple acts as Knuckles, and both offer enough differences that I think they're worth trying out. Tails makes getting to those hard-to-reach places extremely easy, and is overall much more forgiving than Sonic in my experience, because he can fly for a very long time, and Knuckles can glide through the air as well as climb on walls. Unfortunately, I did not really enjoy playing as Knuckles at all, which is why I only played him for a little bit. The glide and climb are both cool, but whenever Knuckles lands after gliding, his momentum completely stops for a second. It throws me off when it happens, and I found it really annoying. But the worst thing about him is that his jump isn't quite as high as Sonic, and it's very noticeable right off the bat. It feels like the levels are designed with Sonic's jump height in mind, because it felt like my jumps were never high enough. The thing that actually caused me to stop playing him was in the Studiopolis Act 2 boss fight, where his jump wasn't high enough to hit Eggman unless he was using the Sun move. I can understand why people might like playing him, and it's an interesting option to have, but it just didn't fit my style, so I stuck with Sonic and Tails. Overall, I like playing as Sonic the most, because he's the only one who can drop dash, and that's a move I use constantly, but additional characters can add to the replayability quite a bit. And basically all of the frustrations I felt on my first playthrough are non-existent on repeat playthroughs. I know enough about the game, and I'm good enough at it to avoid the instant deaths from being crushed most of the time, and I know how to beat most of the bosses extremely quickly. But most importantly, when I got better at collecting rings and getting extra lives, it got to the point where I never had to worry about running out of lives and getting a game over. By the end of my Tails playthrough, I had 31 lives left, so losing progress was basically impossible. When playing against the secret boss, I died like 10 times, but it didn't matter because I started the fight with 20 lives. Instead of worrying about running out of lives, I was able to focus on going through the level as quickly as possible, and as a result, I had a lot of fun. I think the highest praise I can give to Sonic Mania is that I honestly just can't stop playing it. At the time of recording this, I've beaten the game 5 times, and played it for over 20 hours, and I don't know when I'll stop. Despite any problems I have with it, I can't deny that I've had a lot of fun playing. I've become cautiously interested in the Sonic franchise. Although I don't feel particularly compelled to play any of the newer games based on what I've heard, I might play a couple of the older ones at some point. And with that, I think this review of Sonic Mania is complete. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you're a big fan of Sonic, let me ask you a question. Which 3D Sonic game would be the best for me to start out with? The impression I've gotten is that Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors are the two best, but I'm curious to hear what you all think. Please let me know in the comments, and feel free to tell me what you thought of the video. I'm trying to upload somewhat regularly, so hopefully I will see you all again soon. Bye!